Up next, we have a very special guest. Jamie Wheal is the executive director at the Flow Genome Project. Jamie and his team of scientists, athletes, and artists study the mind-body connection and its role in facilitating peak performance. Many people never know that this flow state exists, or occasionally they get a glimpse. But Jamie and his team are working to reverse engineer it and make it available to anyone at any time. Jamie has advised high-growth companies on strategy, execution, and leadership, and consults with Fortune 500 companies. Please join me in welcoming Jamie Wheal.
Good afternoon, everybody. All right, so we're going to pop it up a level. And if you guys ever remember those science experiments when you were a kid, you know, the sort of build your own crystal structure, you know, and you kind of heat the water and you'd add the molecules to the solution and add it, nothing would happen, add it, nothing would happen. And then you'd add that final grain and then you'd suddenly have a crystal castle. So hopefully this talk, this 20 minutes together, will be that final grain, because we've seen and heard some fantastic points of view today, and there's a ton of knowledge and information in this audience about why are we all here? What's the point? What's the actual transformation in this whole technology thing? So if you guys can play this game with me, which is I'm going to be a lot more interesting if we are all interested. So, right, and I know it's late. This is the afternoon shift. I'm English. Normally this is tea time. But truly, the number of times I'm in board meetings just like fantasizing about a couch in the hallway right around now. So thank you guys for hanging in there. Thank you guys for being inside on a beautiful day. And let's just get started. So this is the big idea in 75 words. The first is that life is better than ever, in a nutshell, and we feel worse than ever. We are the whacked out, worried well. Our lives, the standard of living we enjoy, exceed that of pharaohs and kings. Even the poorest among us are enjoying cell phones, motor transport, fruits in 4 seasons, right? Access to a variety of nutrition and diet that no one on the planet ever has had before, and yet we're miserable. Right? Gallup polls suggest that between, depending on which one you read, 70 to 93% of us are disengaged or actively disengaged at work. Now think about that. That's grim, because we're spending more time at work than we are with our own families. For the people we stood up at an altar and said, I do till death do us part, I see that person less than my coworkers, and I'm actively disengaged, which means not only am I on Facebook, Facebook's peak usage hours are between 1 and 4 in the afternoon. Yeah, suck it, employers, right? But also, right? I mean, I don't know if you guys saw that Atlantic Monthly article that went viral in the last 6 weeks, which was the coddling of the American mind, right? And it was talking about trigger warnings and just kind of how, hyper politically correct universities have become, to the place where, college professors are now leery of even just discussing anything for fear of it offending someone. And you think, okay, now that's got dings to free speech and conscious expression, okay, problem. But you would think, okay, well, if nothing else, it's a really safe environment, right? That would be the intent. And that's not true either. 48% of college freshmen now are reporting acute and intense anxiety and depression. So we're in that world. We have access to everything we've ever wanted, and something's missing anyway, and it's nearly killing us. And then throw in lifestyle diseases, throw in 1 in 3 of us are obese. We in the United States spend more on diet products for our pets, right, than the 10th through 20th nations ranked according to GDP spend on childhood medicine and education, right? So let's just say we're a little out of whack, okay? The next step is to say, hey, the way we've been going about trying to fix it, which is predominantly psychological, self-help, personal growth, human development, therapy, right? All of these kinds of things has been fundamentally ineffective, and that what could be much, much more effective would be as if we flip that script and we deprioritize, we deprivilege an exclusively psychological model to finding our happy places, and we actually include bodies and brains in the mix. And the last piece, and that by the way is the moving from running ourselves as operating systems to just user interface. That's kind of was the premise of the title of this talk. And the last piece is, and if you don't jump on this bandwagon, you'll be behind the evolutionary curve. Because the organizations that we work with, it starts with the folks that risk their lives for a living, special operations community, extreme athletes, but it's already spilling into investment banks, hedge funds, neuromarketing, lots of folks in Silicon Valley, all right? Folks are jumping on this now, and it is absolutely what's next. Okay? So that's answer first, just so you're never wondering what the hell I'm talking about. All right, we're going to do this in 5 parts. Part 1, Maslow's hammer and the sorcerer's hat. So Abe Maslow is famous for many things. Probably that pyramid, that hierarchy of needs is the one that most folks know. But he also coined that great expression, which is, when all you've got's a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. And I would propose that that's exactly where we are with our self-construct, our ego senses, right, that are actually stunningly, incredibly recent inventions. That's new technology that really we didn't have stable and distributed access to, at least in the Western world, until the French Enlightenment. Before that, the way we think of ourselves is I'm an autonomous, independent individual. I'm a skin-encapsulated ego. I can go anywhere, do anything, become anything I want, right? I can write my own story. Those senses really weren't online until the French Enlightenment. And proof is positive, which is, think why we know Descartes' famous cogito ergo sum, I think, therefore I am. He said, hey, mentation, cogitation is equivalent to existence. Right? Rousseau said, we are blank slates. We are tabula rasas upon which we write the arc of our lives. It was awesome. It was revolutionary. It paved the way for, right, democracy, for civil rights. Right? Everything that we're seeing, even the Supreme Court rulings, right, on gay marriage, come from that very same tradition. Right? Self-aware, autonomous individuals having inalienable rights. We started developing our ability to think abstractly. Right? We really honed our reason. We used our opposable thumbs. We built amazing shit. We wouldn't be able to have this conference about transformative technology unless we had had that awareness. But we made one critical mistake, which is we forgot to install the off switch. Right? And like Mickey and Fantasia, we put on that incredibly powerful perspective. And we used it to do all sorts of things, including our dirty dishes. But it got away from us. And so we went from the mouse pretending to be the sorcerer, right, to Woody Allen, right, neurotic, self-obsessed, unable to get out of our own way, right? And we've already identified how much that hurts and how much it's costing us, even as we practically drown in the abundance, right, that wizard's hat has created for us. So that's a pretty bleak assessment, but I wouldn't be here today if there wasn't something that we're all on the cusp of, and I think none of us would be here today if we didn't all sense that. And things are changing right now, and things are changing in such a way, and they're changing so fast that this really does kind of get back to Arthur C. Clarke's quip, the guy who wrote 2001 that Kubrick then turned into that classic film. He said, any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. And what we're looking at, what's possible these days, at first can seem like magic. But there are four forces. There are four things going on right now, specifically this last decade. And their paths are crossing in a way that they haven't ever before. These are nothing new under the sun, right? All these trends have been extant and observable, but they're intersecting, they're braiding together right now in ways they haven't before. And if you notice that slide says the four forces for unlocking ecstasis. And ecstasis is in italics because it's a foreign word. It's Greek, right? And it actually means, and it's the original root of our word ecstasy. But our word ecstasy is kind of trampled in the mud. It has a lot of connotations and a lot of misapplications. But if you take just the strict definition, ex means out of. Stasis, stasis or self. It literally means to step out of oneself, to have something other than a monophasic, right, a single one channel of awareness, right, into a polyphasic, multiple channels of awareness that I can operate from, that I can gain information from, that I can gain inspiration from. And that's an anthropological term. They assess cultures. Are they monophasic or polyphasic, right? Most indigenous cultures are polyphasic. They accept dreams, they accept premonitions, they accept possession, they accept visitations, both demonic and divine, right? They accept a whole range of information feeds that we would typically disqualify. We would say, that's bullshit, that's made up, that's superstitious, right? So we understandably, right, that was the whole French Enlightenment, that was the whole modern and postmodern era. Awesome, thank you, right? Let's get this down to brass tacks. But there's an opportunity for us to have a postmodern, post-rational, polyphasic culture, right? Where we gain credible access, where we don't lose our bearings, where we can strip out the mythologies and the superstitions, but keep the technologies and the data feeds. And here they are. The first one is neurobiology. It's a big part of why we're here, right? From the decade of the brain in the 90s, where they pumped millions and millions of dollars into this, we got a whole lot more information on what's going on in our bodies and brains when we experience alternate states of consciousness. And it went from mythological projections. This was the muses, right? This was God, right? This was the devil. This was something outside of myself. Into here are these structural, functional relationships of my body and brain while I'm experiencing these states. And there's so much great stuff out in the halls, right? Doing exactly that. This is my brain on joy. This is my brain on fear. This is my brain on computation. Fantastic, right? The next is the technology. And, Tim was talking a little bit about this with Electric Daisy Carnival and Burning Man and things like that. But think about the archaic techniques of ecstasy. You would get the fire, you'd get the people drumming, you'd get the people chanting. That really didn't scale beyond acoustic earshot. Right? You would have dozens, you'd maybe have hundreds, right? But you couldn't have thousands, and you sure as hell couldn't have hundreds of thousands of people experiencing the same thing, the same state, in the same time, in the same place. Interesting geeky sidebar, they've just done some studies on the caves of Lascaux and some of the French and Portuguese caves, right? Some of the ancient Neolithic rock art. And they've done some acoustic testing of why did they put the beautiful rock art where they put it. And they've actually found that they consistently cited the most beautiful installations in the places of highest acoustic resonance. They literally painted their pictures to throw their parties in the subwoofers of the cave, right? Pretty awesome, like some low-tech beat doctoring. So think about that. Right? Think about Function 1 sound systems. Think about the exquisite, my goodness, we went to see one of our favorite bands, Emancipator, was playing at Burning Man, and a bunch of people gathered around. He turned the music up too loud, boom, crashed the generator, and 3 minutes later, it came back on. And this was, there were a lot of people there for a favorite and loved act. But when they turned the music back on, something was up with the power source, and there was no bass. And within 5 minutes, the crowd had just kind of drifted away to nothing. And you're like, oh my gosh, you just bass junkies. You guys are shameless, right? But think about that, right? We are absolutely able to now, right, scale transformation because of our technologies. This one's an easy one, a layup, people, pharmacology, right? We have access to not just the botany of desire, as Michael Pollan has talked about, where we shape plants and plants shape us. We have access to molecules of desire at this point, right? We know the neurochemistry of bliss. We don't have to treat it like a great white whale. Like maybe someday there's something more. Maybe one day I'll find out the meaning of ... Right? You can find the molecule, you can ingest it, you can have that experience. And that's from big pharma, and that's from basement labs. That's from Sasha Shulgin up in Berkeley, right? All the way out and around the world to ayahuasca analogs, realizing, oh, wow, there are tryptamines and there are inhibitors everywhere. Neat, right? And now there's 3D printers where you can literally, and I think they've just approved 3-4 weeks ago, right? The first 3D printed pharmacology. We literally can pick the person we want to be and print the molecules to take us there. Pretty radical. And it sure beats the hell out of an unleadened wafer, right? And a shot of, like poorly aged grape juice as a technology of the sacred. And lastly, psychology, right? And I'm actually going to, the whole premise of this talk is let's put a bullet in psychology, but that in itself is an upgrade to our psychology, right? We will always have an interior lived experience. And so the psychology is, if you think back to World War II, you've got, you've got organization man wearing the suit, kind of like our dear, emotionally repressed grandfathers, right? Didn't have access to a broad range of emotions, right? And mother's little helper, kind of compliant homemakers. There was no range that was permitted to express and explore integrated, complex, post-conventional humanity. And then hat tip to the boomers, right? Anybody who saw the final episode of Mad Men, good old Don Draper is just like walking that arc for us over 7 seasons, right? Ends up at Esalen, right? Has his come to Jesus Gestalt moments, right? And that stretches the envelope. And then you get a little further, and then you have, on Oprah, you've got Eckhart Tolle talking about non-dual consciousness, and it's one of the largest, right? It's one of the largest workshops she ever offers. You have tens of millions of people, conventional folks, riffing on Eckhart, right? I mean, that's stretching the envelope. And now you have, the very first Google Doodle ever was gone to Burning Man. Like what's going on? What's going on? So the scope and the range of permissible, right, headspaces, identity constructs, relationships to self and other are massively expanded. You put all these 4 together, and we're looking at a powder keg. And actually, what even more interesting is we're looking at a genie that can't be put back in the bottle. Because in the past, and we're actually, the next book that Stephen Kotler and I, my co-founder of the Flow Genome Project, are writing is called Stealing Fire. And it's basically talking about exactly this, the secret revolution in human possibility. And for the last 3,000 years, there's been a cat and mouse game between the priests and the Prometheans. And every time someone steals fire, every single time, the priests come and lock it down, often violently, right? And let's not kid ourselves that this time is any different. Okay, and it's, the 20th century version we like to call spooks to kooks. There's been this cat and mouse game between the counterculture and the military industrial complex. And every time it slips out, right? I mean, Kesey found acid at the Stanford Med Center, put there by the CIA. Boom, right? Blows up his graduate department, except for Larry McMurtry, right? And the rest is history. Okay? Then you get Men Who Stare at Goats in the 70s. And you get the Navy going to infiltrate the counterculture to figure out the edges of human development. And then they write this Earth First Battalion saying, we can all be warriors for peace. Beautiful, inspiring, right? But what happens to the CIA Abu Ghraib? They take one line from the Earth First Battalion manual of the 70s, which says you can use music to align and integrate large crowds. Final sentence, could also be used to disrupt or dismay. That then becomes, in Abu Ghraib, the Barney and the Purple Dinosaur theme song getting blared, right, at prisoners in Iraq, right? And that got, in the news cycle, that was right at the end of the Today Show, like after Ling Ling the panda had a new baby and get a load of, and then, yuck, yuck, Barney and the Purple Dinosaur, that would drive me crazy too. That was covert psyops, right, taking the human potential movement from the 70s and turning it explicitly on its end. Right? Now you've got DARPA PhDs doing beer for data in Afghanistan, right? And then showing, and based on Burning Man principles, coming back to Burning Man, having their buddies in DARPA commandeer a spy satellite to watch Hurricane Katrina as it rolls through New Orleans, right, while everybody's on the playa. So you just think, wow, this is interesting. This is really, really interesting. SEAL Team 6, DevGru, right? You round the corner in their mine gym. They're using this to like train their super soldiers. They have float tanks designed and developed by John Lilly, who was the original crazy gangster, right? NIH researcher went way off the reservation, designed and built float tanks, started experimenting with LSD and then ketamine, right? And those became the domains of hippies and crystal-hugging Fruit Loops, right? Now it's training the super soldiers of the next generation. So if anybody, has anybody heard the book, The Master Switch by Tim Wu? I think he's a Columbia information professor, right? Badass book. If you haven't read it, you need to read it. Because it says in a nutshell, he says all information technologies, from the telegraph to the radio to film and certainly to the internet, right, start out wildly utopian and democratic. Each one of them, we are sure, is going to turn the tide for good once and for all. And he says, and every single time, they end up hegemonic and centrally controlled. So the thesis of this talk, which I'm way off the reservation into this tangent, I'm glad we're here, is hacking these altered states with these four forces is child's play. No one should be dying wondering at this point. The question is, what do we do next and what do we do with them? And if we consider this fundamentally an information technology, right, it gets us access to more real-time data from more data feeds that we can do more with. We should expect it to behave like all other information technologies, which means it's up to us to keep this democratic. It's up to us to ensure that this is continually used for the highest and best and doesn't get co-opted. Because I'll tell you, right? I mean, I'll tell you who's already onto this. Right? Military-industrial complex, hedge funds and day traders, right? And neuromarketers looking to bend us to the will of commerce and more widgets. That's already happening. So this community is an essential. If you guys remember that, again, Kubrick, that film Spartacus, right, with Kirk Douglas. You guys remember that from way back when? Right, and the Romans put down the rebellion, and Spartacus, and they're all nailed up on the crucifixes down the Roman way, and he says, which one of you is Spartacus? Do you guys remember what he did? They all say, I am, I am, I am. So I think that's our opportunity, right? I am Prometheus. We are all stealing fire. And if we do it, they can't catch us. Yeah. So what is exactly this north of happy that we're talking about? Because it's not optimal psych. This is not about helping my existing current ego-bound self just feel better. It's not about just shoring up my insecurities or my neuroses. It's not about reaffirming my stories and my narratives. I mean, that's beautiful, deep work. And there's tons of great and dedicated people in this room and out in the world doing it. So absolute hat tip, amen, and gratitudes. But that's not what I'm here to talk about. That's not what we're doing. What we're talking about is what's north of happy, what is an entirely different domain. And fundamentally, there are a lot of different metrics. There are a lot of different frameworks for discussing altered states. The one that we've kind of settled on is kind of a mashup of some of the strongest ones, at least from our own both research and lived experience. This stacks for us. We can inhabit it. It's useful, which is the notion of STIR, the acronym STIR. So these altered states, and these are different than out-of-body experiences. These are different than basically disease states. These are different than accidental things that happen to catapult you. Wow, awesome. All right, and is that including questions? 2 questions, awesome, thank you. Okay, yeah, so I'll leave it, I'll walk us through this and I'll leave you with that. STIR, there are these 4 things that happen. First, we experience selflessness. Our inner critic goes quiet. The technical reason is transient hyperfrontality, that pesky but wonderful prefrontal cortex. Remember, we talked about where's the off switch? This is the off switch, right? That area of our brain shuts down, and we feel like $1,000,000, and that silence is fantastic. Next is timelessness. We consistently drop out of fearful futures, painful pasts, right? Or fantastic futures or perfect past, but we come into the now, the deep now, right? It's what Phil Zimbardo at Stanford discusses in his book, The Time Paradox. And we are here and only here. And by the way, this is the only place we get reliable data anyway. Mark Twain said, he said, I'm an old man, and I've experienced a great many terrible things, only some of which ever happened, right? And here now is actually a pretty good spot to be. And the neurochemistry of these altered states, the dopamine, the endorphins, the anandamide, the oxytocin, the serotonin, the norepinephrine, feel awesome. They are very potent reward and learning chemicals. And instead of feeling like we ought to or we must or we should, we can't not. These are the kids sledding until they can't feel their fingers anymore. Right? It's those joyful experiences. So anybody building apps that are talking about gamifying stuff, please stop. You're building the wrong thing. Right? We have intrinsic desires to learn and grow. These are they. Help us get there. Don't slap goddamn merit badges on B.F. Skinner. Okay? And when I get that inner critic out of the way, and I drop into the present with real-time data feeds all around me, right, and I am effortlessly engaged, what do I experience? Well, I tend to experience rich information. I perceive more. I make more lateral connections, right? I make more gestalt integrations. That's the gamma wave kind of movements. And I tend to experience information that becomes inspiration. If I act on it, that inspiration becomes integration, and we continually get to level up. And that's kind of it. That's the whole ball game. So we get to move from operating system, I'm worried, well, I'm neurotic, I'm seeking pleasure, I'm avoiding pain, I want people to validate my stories, and I just get to play the game of, how do I tune myself? How do I tune myself to get back to that place? And then I will learn what's next when I'm there. Thank you, guys.